Next, I'm delighted to introduce you to Jennie Savage. Jennie is an urbanist, a creative thinker, and a social researcher specializing in human centered design and place shaping. Her work explores the dynamic relationship between public space, architecture, individuals, and their communities, the way we shape space, and how space shapes us. Jenny is an expert in engaging individuals and communities and co produces design frameworks, vision documents, and spatial or strategic plans in close consultation with those who are most affected. She is a public practice alumna and an RTPI Woman of Influence, and she regularly works as part of place shaping teams and leads engagement and research across a wide range of contexts, always ensuring the social fabric and lived realities of spaces are integral to the design process. Jenny.
Thank you. Oh, okay, so this is just the starting thing. So, yeah, I've got a kind of co-design practice, I suppose, which I've kind of been developing over the last 25 years, and that's really been process-led, and it's focused on a do-with approach to learning with people about the places or the situations that we're kind of working in. And I think it's a really interesting moment to start thinking about how we involve people more in the making of places. Obviously, we're facing the climate crisis. We've got an imperative to have biodiversity net gain, to make places more playable, more livable, more relevant to where people live. And it makes sense to actually involve people in that process, and kind of drawing on that kind of breadth of experience, as Neil's already pointed to, actually gives us a greater sort of resource in order to imagine, design, think about what places might be. So today I'm going to present the gender inclusive design evidence base and design guidance that I wrote for Tower Hamlets. And through this example, I'll sort of illustrate a co-design process, but then also talk about the kind of detail of what I've learned about the experience of working with women and girls. So just to sort of preface that, I think co-design is a practice that can make an effective contribution to the design of inclusive spaces. And I think it's a really useful tool to use in order to kind of work both at sort of hyper-local levels, as Neil's just indicated, but also at strategic levels to influence kind of design frameworks and kind of big-scale influential decision-making processes, which need to involve people's lived experience. So I'm going to start off by just going through the project that I did at Tower Hamlets. So I was working actually at the council. I was a public practice associate there, and I was there for 2 years. And when I started, the project was really to look at women's safety. And in between kind of being offered the job and taking the job, I came up with a number of statements which I've posed as questions here, because I kind of felt these were questions that I was feeling going into the job, and I wondered if other people felt the same as me. So the first thing being that when women and girls are consulted about their experience of the city, they're only ever asked about safety. So we create this kind of echo chamber where we say, well, women don't feel safe in the city, and we only ever talk about safety. So I started to think about, well, what would we learn about women's experience of the city if we asked a different set of questions? Secondly, I started to think about the built environment, which has evolved kind of without including the experiences of women and girls, and what that might look like if we found out what they felt and thought about things, and how that might kind of emerge as a kind of design framework. And then lastly, urban landscapes are designed by and for men, and they reproduce systemic inequality, ? So these were things that I kind of went into the job wanting to find out. And I started in the role. I had never worked in a local authority before, and I wasn't really sure what I was going to be doing. But they seemed happy for me to kind of get on with things. So I started the project off by going out and recording street interviews. And I recorded about 50 interviews with women and girls from across the borough. I think street interviews are a really great tool for finding out or scoping a project. You don't need anyone to get on a bus and join you at a session. You can make sure that you've got a really diverse set of respondents because you go up. I mean, a lot of people don't want to stop and talk to you, to be honest. But actually, through doing these kind of initial street interviews, I started to get a sense of what the scope of the project could be. At the time, I should say that this project was produced to support an inclusive design policy in the new local plan. And going through Reg 18, which is the statutory engagement that a local plan has to go through, I used these audio recordings in a story map to start off the process of like testing the sorts of things that I was finding out with people. So if you can see these dots on the map, they're all audio tracks that you could click on and listen to, and it was just like women talking about the places that they lived in, the kind of experiences that they were having there. You know, it might be like, I love coming here, this is my favourite park and I really enjoy it because of ... So it was really focusing as much on what attracted people to certain places as much as what the problems were in those places. Through that initial scoping, I felt that people that I spoke to talked much more about a need for a culture shift rather than a sort of the kind of hysteria that we hear about in the media in terms of women's safety, and that's all, you know, a kind of limited experience of cities. So this idea of a culture shift was much more about, I want to go jogging and I don't want someone to make a comment about my arse, rather than like, you know, I'm terrified to go out of the house. And I think these were the kinds of comments that were coming back much more readily than the kind of more hysterical kind of media representations. People talked about a sense of community and belonging, strengthening feelings of safety for everyone. And so this was an idea, I think, in design terms, we think about safety as what we remove from a space. How do we create spaces where we get rid of the benches, we get rid of the things in the landscape, and that will make a really nice safe space. But actually, people wanted to create more welcoming spaces. And again, I think in design terms, that's about thinking, well, what do you bring in? How do you layer a space up? How do you make it more multiplicitous, if you like? And that finally the scope of the work has to reflect the holistic experiences of women and girls. So whether that's teenage girls, nighttime safety, thinking about parents with children, playable space, etc. There's a whole kind of a load of stuff. So from that kind of initial scoping exercise, I then set up a series of shorter projects which were really kind of listening exercises, which I'm going to flick through because I don't have enough time to go into detail. But these were like online sessions, the digital walks, where people walked us around their area and talked about like different experiences of different places. And I did a series of listening exercises. This one was at a community group in Bethnal Green, but I also did them with the NHS, with Queen Mary University, with a local housing association and the health network. So it was just, again, testing ideas with people, saying, this is what I found out, what do you think? And kind of building in those feedback loops. This led to this QR code doesn't work, so don't try and make it work. But I tried it this morning, it's run out. So through that, I spoke to about 500 women and girls, and I wrote this evidence base, which was really kind of building this kind of vision, I suppose, which you can see on the far side, saying, okay, we need to focus on creating welcoming spaces. We need to focus on inclusivity. So that's actually really like, how do we involve people much more in using space? So if you have a local park, how do you get involved and actually do stuff in the park? How do you organise space? How do you get involved? And then finally looking at how to create a more restorative borough, because actually people talked so much about the value of green space, about how much they loved being able to go out in the parks, walk along the canals, and that they really wanted more of that. So in order to then, I suppose, I think like when you talk about a kind of gender inclusive design framework, perhaps, the evidence base to start with, perhaps that can maybe feel a bit abstract or perhaps alienate some people. And so I really wanted to make something then which showed what it would look like to actually embed gender inclusive design at a hyper local level. So I set up a collaboration with some young women and teaching staff at Queen Mary University of London, and we organised these walking journals, and we set up an app where they could record where they walked, and then they'd come home and they'd fill in these walking journals, which really got them to reflect about how they feel in different places. And again, that was very much like testing against what we'd already found out in the evidence base, and then just trying to see if there was any kind of new information coming from that. And these sessions were really great. We provided these sessions focused on young women and non-binary people. Am I okay for time? Just because that had been a group that I'd found, those had been groups that I'd found quite difficult to engage initially. And there was some really great sort of outcomes from these sessions, including one thing that somebody said, which I just thought was really brilliant, was, oh, up until this point, I hadn't realised I could choose where I walked, and if I choose where I walk, I own the cities, and I thought that was really interesting, just in terms of kind of taking ownership of your thing. As a result of that, I organised a design charrette, which included the young women and non-binary people from that session, and then involved also local experts, people from the local authority, designers, architects, planning policy people. And we started to kind of trying to work up what that would look like if it was delivered. And we used the green grid, which is another policy in the local plan. We used the green grid as a kind of framework to design a kind of multi-layered, multiplicity of things happening along this green grid, which I was kind of interested in, this idea of the green grid being a feminist architecture, something that you could add on to or take away from. 3 minutes, okay, that's great, thank you. So this design guidance again is available, but not via this QR code. But you can kind of search these up. I think you can find them online. Oh, have you? Okay, great. Okay, thanks. So yeah, this was really about kind of how to realise this. And then I've recently just finished a project with Queen Mary University where we funded 4 community groups to do pilot projects. I'm just going to flick through quickly. To do pilot projects that really tested the design guidance on a very small level. But what was so interesting about these projects, we funded 4 groups. Each group showed how brilliant it would be to have like more inclusive design, but they also showed up what the barriers were to doing that. And I think it was really interesting because what we realized was, even though there was a lot of goodwill to deliver inclusive design, actually it's so difficult. Just if you've got a park and someone says, oh, I'd like to organize a community growing project here, no one will sign it off. And so these sort of barriers to actually empowering people, getting them to be able to sort of take ownership over places which would make them feel welcoming, it would therefore make them feel safer, it would therefore build social prosperity, it would therefore do X, Y, and Z, all of the things we've done. But actually the systems need to be in place in order to be able to sign off those things. So this was the really interesting thing that came out of these pilot projects. But also, I mean, just here, I don't know if you can see, we worked with the East London Garden Society, and I don't know if you've noticed, but just by Shoreditch High Street train station, there's a forest growing on the train line that goes all the way out to Barking, and it was like really brilliant, like as soon as he showed it to us. And so their project really is to try and open up that forest and kind of make it accessible to people. So I'll finish there. Thank you.